The woman in the snow wasn't moving anymore. Colter Brennan pulled his horse to a stop, squinting through the blizzard at the dark shape half buried in white. He should keep riding. A man alone survived by staying alone. That's what 8 years of frontier life had taught him. But her hand was still reaching toward something. Still hoping. He was off his horse before he'd made the decision. His boots sinking deep as he ran toward her. When he turned her over, her lips were blue. Her eyes flickered open once the color of summer sky before closing again. She was dying. And he was all she had. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances and the kind of love that changes everything, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends, I promise you that. Montana Territory, February 1882. Colter Brennan had been riding for 3 days straight when the storm caught him. Not riding toward anything. Riding away like always. Away from the questions in Billings about the shooting. Away from the woman who'd asked him to stay. Away from the foreman who'd said he had potential if he'd just put down roots somewhere. Potential. The word tasted bitter as the wind that now cut through his coat. "Easy, Ash," he murmured to his gray gelding as they pushed through knee-deep snow. The horse's ears flattened against the howling wind. Visibility had dropped to nothing in the last hour. Colter couldn't see the mountains anymore. Couldn't see anything but white. He'd lost the trail. Not that there'd been much of a trail to begin with. He'd been cutting across open country, trying to reach the Yellowstone River Valley before his supplies ran out. Now he wasn't sure he'd reach nightfall. The cold was the kind that killed. The kind that made men stupid, made them think they could rest for just a minute. Then that minute turned into forever, and someone found them in the spring thaw, frozen in whatever position they'd fallen. Colter had found men like that. He wouldn't be one of them. "We need shelter, boy," he said, though the wind ripped his words away. "Anything. A tree line, a rock face, anything." Ash stumbled, caught himself. The horse was exhausted. They both were. That's when Colter saw it, a dark shape ahead, maybe 30 yards. At first, he thought it was a boulder. Then he thought it might be a dead animal. The shape was wrong for either. His gut twisted. It was a person. "No," he said aloud. "No, no, no." He should keep riding. He should focus on saving himself and his horse. That was the smart play. The survival play. The play that had kept him breathing for 28 years in a territory that killed fools and heroes with equal enthusiasm. But even as these thoughts ran through his head, Colter was already turning Ash toward the fallen figure. Because some things mattered more than survival. He dismounted while still moving his boots, hitting the snow hard. The wind nearly knocked him sideways. He bent low and pushed forward each step a battle. When he reached the shape, his heart dropped. It was a woman. She lay on her side, curled against the wind, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something before she collapsed. Snow had already started to bury her. Another hour, and she would have been invisible. Gone. Colter dropped to his knees beside her and brushed snow from her face. Young. Maybe 23, 24. Fine features even with the cold leaching color from her skin. Dark blonde hair spilled from beneath a fur-lined hat. She wore a heavy wool coat over what looked like riding clothes, but nothing was enough against this storm. "Ma'am?" He shook her shoulder gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. He pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, holding his breath. There. Faint, but there. A pulse. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you're alive. Let's keep you that way." He looked around and spotted her horse 10 yards away, standing with its head down, reins dragging. The animal looked as exhausted as Ash. It hadn't abandoned its rider, which said something about both the horse and the woman. Colter gathered the woman into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, though the wet, heavy clothes added weight. Her head lolled against his chest. He could feel how cold she was, even through his coat. He needed shelter. Now. He managed to get her onto Ash, then climbed up behind her, holding her against him with one arm, while he grabbed her horse's reins with the other. The two horses plodded forward, heads down against the wind. Colter scanned the white void ahead, looking for anything there. Through a gap in the blowing snow, he caught a glimpse of a dark square shape. A building. "Come on," he urged the horses. "Just a little further." It took forever to cover the 100 yards. By the time they reached the structure, Colter's arms were shaking from holding the woman. But it was a cabin, abandoned from the look of it, but standing solid with 4 walls and a roof. He'd take it. The door wasn't locked. Colter kicked it open and carried the woman inside, laying her gently on a narrow bed frame with a straw mattress. The cabin was small, 1 room with a potbelly stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, and the bed. Dust covered everything, but it was dry. Most importantly, it was out of the wind. Colter worked fast. He secured both horses in a lean-to attached to the cabin's side, bringing their saddles and his gear inside. He found kindling and logs stacked by the stove. Someone had followed the code of the frontier, leaving supplies for the next traveler who needed shelter. His hands shook as he built the fire. Not from cold, from something else. From the knowledge that he'd almost ridden past her, almost left her to die because saving her meant risking himself. What did that make him? The fire caught. Colter fed it until heat began to fill the small space, then turned his attention back to the woman. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, barely visible. Her skin felt like ice. Colter had seen this before. Hypothermia. If he didn't warm her up, she'd die anyway, shelter or no shelter. He pulled off her wet coat and boots, his movements quick and efficient. Nothing improper. This was about survival. He wrapped her in both his blankets and the worn quilt from the bed, then moved her closer to the stove. Then he set about making coffee with snow melted in a pot and grounds from his saddlebag. The familiar routine steadied him, gave his hands something to do while his mind churned. Who was she? What was she doing out here alone? Because she had been alone. There were no other tracks around her, no sign of a companion or a group, just her and her horse caught in the storm. The coffee started to boil, the cabin warmed. Colter poured a cup and crouched beside the woman, raising her head gently. "Come on," he said softly. "Time to wake up. You're safe now. You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered. "That's it," Colter encouraged. "Come back." Her eyes opened slowly. They were gray-blue, the color of a winter sky just before snow. They focused on him with confusion, then awareness, then something that might have been fear. "Easy," Colter said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe. I found you in the storm. We're in a cabin about, honestly, I don't know where we are, but we're out of the wind." She stared at him, those winter sky eyes searching his face. Then she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Cold. I know. Here." He held the cup to her lips. "Slow sips. It's hot." She drank, coughed, drank again. Color began to return to her cheeks. After a few moments, she pushed the cup away gently and tried to sit up. "Slow," Colter warned, helping her. "You've been out in the cold too long. Your body needs time." She nodded, then looked around the cabin, taking in their situation. When her gaze returned to him, there was intelligence in those eyes. Assessment. "You saved my life," she said. Her voice was stronger now, cultured. Eastern education mixed with Western practicality. Colter shrugged, uncomfortable. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most men would have ridden past. Most men would have chosen their own survival over a stranger's life." The accuracy of that statement hit harder than Colter liked, because she was right, and he'd almost been one of those men. "Well," he said, standing up to give himself distance from her direct gaze, "I didn't ride past, so here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I'm Evangeline. Evangeline Hartwell. Colter Brennan. He moved back to the stove, pouring himself coffee, just to have something to do with his hands. What were you doing out in this storm? Miss Hartwell. Evangeline, she corrected. And I wasn't alone when I set out. I was traveling with two of my ranch hands. We were heading back from buying breeding stock in Miles City. She paused, worry crossing her face. The storm came faster than we expected. We got separated in the whiteout. Marcus and James, they're experienced. They'll have found shelter. Your ranch hands, Colter repeated, unable to keep surprise from his voice. A small smile touched her lips. Yes, Mr. Brennan. My ranch hands. The Hartwell Ranch has been mine since my father died 4 years ago. Colter nodded, processing this. Female ranch owners weren't common, but they existed. Usually widows, occasionally daughters, almost always struggling unless they had substantial help. How much land? He asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that's rude. It's practical, Evangeline said. Out here land is currency. The Hartwell spread runs 40,000 acres along the Madison River Valley. Colter nearly dropped his coffee cup. 40,000 acres. That wasn't a ranch. That was an empire. He turned to look at her more carefully. Now that color had returned to her face, he could see the quality of her clothes beneath the trail dust. The fine leather of her boots. The silver clasp on her hat. This wasn't a woman playing at ranching while hired men did the real work. You run it yourself, he asked. With an excellent foreman and crew, Evangeline said. But yes, the decisions are mine. The responsibility is mine. She met his gaze steadily. I know every section of that land, Mr. Brennan. Every creek, every box canyon, every winter shelter. My father made sure of that before he died. He had no sons, you see. Just me. And he wasn't the kind of man to let convention limit his daughter's education. There was challenge in her voice. Defiance. Like she expected him to question her capability. Colter thought about the woman he'd found in the snow, about how her horse had stayed with her, about the quality of that horse he'd seen it in the lean-to. A well-bred, well-trained animal that trusted its rider enough to stand in a blizzard rather than run for shelter. Sounds like your father was a smart man, Colter said simply. Something in Evangeline's expression softened. He was. He understood that survival out here isn't about following rules. It's about adapting to reality. Amen to that, Colter muttered, settling into one of the chairs. Outside, the storm continued its assault. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters. But inside, warmth slowly spread. Not just from the fire. And you? Evangeline asked. What brings you to the middle of nowhere in the worst blizzard of the winter? Wrong place, wrong time, Colter said. That's not an answer. He smiled despite himself. No, it's not. Are you running from something or toward something? The question was too perceptive. Colter took a long drink of coffee before answering. What makes you think it's one or the other? Because men like you don't end up in the middle of a Montana blizzard by accident, Evangeline said. You're alone. No wagon, no pack mules, just a horse and minimal gear. You're either running or searching. And if you were searching, you'd have better supplies. Colter stared at her. You always this direct? Usually more so, she said with a slight smile. My foreman says I'd make a better interrogator than a rancher. Despite everything, the storm, the near-death experience, the strangeness of their situation, Colter laughed. It surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he genuinely laughed. Fair enough, he said. I'm drifting. Have been for about 8 years now. I work where I can find it move on when the season ends or the work dries up. Currently, I was headed toward the Yellowstone Valley. Heard there might be work on some of the spreads down there. That's still not an answer to my question, Evangeline observed. Colter set down his coffee cup. Running, he said quietly. I'm running. From what? From staying too long. From caring too much. From letting people depend on me, and then... He stopped himself. He'd already said too much. But Evangeline didn't push. She just nodded like she understood. My father used to say the frontier is full of people running from something. The question is whether they're running so hard they can't see what's right in front of them. Oh. That sounds like a man who had a lot of opinions, Colter said, trying to lighten the moment. He did, Evangeline agreed. Most of them right, which made him insufferable. She smiled at the memory, but there was sadness in it. He died of pneumonia 4 winters ago. Came on fast. By the time we got him to a doctor in Bozeman, it was too late. I'm sorry, Colter said, and meant it. He knew what it was to lose a father. His own had died of pneumonia too back in Nebraska when Colter was 17. Thank you, Evangeline said softly. Then she straightened visibly, pushing the sadness aside. But enough melancholy. We're alive, we're warm, and we have coffee. That's more than we had an hour ago. You're not wrong, Colter admitted. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm. Colter found himself watching Evangeline from the corner of his eye. She had her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, staring into the fire. Her profile was striking: strong nose-defined cheekbones, determined jaw. This was a woman who'd learned to stand against the wind. How long do you think the storm will last? She asked. Colter considered. Hard to say. Could blow through by morning. Could rage for 3 days. This time of year blizzards are unpredictable. Then we'd better ration our supplies, Evangeline said practically. What do you have? They pooled their resources. Colter had jerky hardtack coffee and dried apples in his saddlebags. Evangeline had similar supplies, plus a small flask of whiskey and a tin of tea. We can make it work, Evangeline said, taking inventory. Assuming we're careful. I'm always careful, Colter said. Except when you risk your life to save a stranger in a blizzard, Evangeline pointed out. Except then, Colter admitted. As the afternoon wore into evening, they settled into an unexpected routine. Colter tended the horses, bringing in more wood, keeping the fire fed. Evangeline organized their supplies and fashioned a makeshift drying rack for their wet clothes near the stove. They worked well together, Colter noticed. No wasted words, no unnecessary direction. Just 2 competent people handling what needed to be done. When full darkness fell outside, they shared a meager meal of jerky and hardtack, washed down with hot coffee spiked with a bit of Evangeline's whiskey. To survival, Evangeline said, raising her cup. To survival, Colter echoed, touching his cup to hers. As they ate, they talked. Small things at first. The differences between Montana and Nebraska winters. The best way to break a horse. Whether coffee or tea was superior for early mornings. They disagreed. Colter was firmly in the coffee camp, while Evangeline argued tea had more sophistication. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Why 8 years? Evangeline asked. That's oddly specific. Most drifters lose count after a while. Colter stared into his cup. Because 8 years ago I had a reason to stop drifting. A homestead in Nebraska. Nothing fancy, 160 acres, decent water, good soil. My father and I had worked it since I was a kid. Then he died, and I couldn't afford to keep paying the mortgage. Bank foreclosed. I was 17, suddenly homeless, and I swore I'd never put down roots again. Because if you don't have roots, you can't lose them, Evangeline said softly. Exactly. That's a lonely way to live, Colter. He looked up at her. Lonely is safe. Safe from what? From loss, from pain, from caring about someone and then... He stopped himself again. Evangeline leaned forward. From caring about someone and then losing them anyway, because death comes for everyone eventually. The blunt words hit like a physical blow. Because that was exactly it. That was the fear that had driven him for 8 years. Yes, Colter said quietly. I understand that fear. Evangeline said. I do. I've buried everyone. I loved my mother when I was 13. My father 4 years ago. My grandmother last winter. I know what loss tastes like, Colter. It tastes like ashes, and it never fully goes away. She set down her cup and met his eyes. But here's what I've learned. Avoiding connections doesn't make you safe. It just makes you isolated. And isolation is its own kind of death. It's slower than freezing in a blizzard, but just as final. Colter wanted to argue, wanted to defend the philosophy that had guided him for nearly a decade. But the words died in his throat. Because sitting here in this cabin, warm and alive, because he'd chosen connection over isolation, because he'd chosen to save a stranger instead of riding past, he couldn't make himself believe his old arguments anymore. You're very wise for someone who almost died a few hours ago, he finally said. Evangeline smiled. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying one's thinking. As the night deepened, exhaustion caught up with them. Colter insisted Evangeline take the bed while he made a pallet near the stove. I should protest, Evangeline said. Insist on taking turns or sharing the bed platonically or some other civilized arrangement. But, Colter prompted. But I'm too tired to argue, and that bed looks like heaven, she admitted. Colter laughed. Get some rest, Evangeline. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move. But as he lay on his makeshift bed, listening to the storm and Evangeline's steady breathing, Colter found sleep elusive. His mind kept replaying the moment he'd seen her in the snow, the choice he'd made without really deciding, the way she'd looked at him with those winter sky eyes. He'd spent 8 years avoiding exactly this connection responsibility, caring about someone beyond himself. And in the span of a few hours, a stranger named Evangeline Hartwell had started to unravel all of it. The storm raged on. Inside the cabin, something else was beginning. Something that would change both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. But for now, they slept. Alive, warm, and together. And that was enough. Colter woke to silence. The absence of sound was so complete it took him a moment to understand what had changed. Then it hit him. The wind had stopped. The storm was over. He sat up slowly, his back protesting from a night on the floor. Gray dawn light filtered through the cabin's small window. The fire had burned down to embers, and Evangeline was already awake, standing at the window, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. It's beautiful, she said without turning around. Come look. Colter stood and moved to join her. Outside, the world had been transformed. Snow lay in deep drifts that sparkled in the early light, smooth and pristine, except where the wind had carved strange shapes. The sky was clearing from the west bands of pink and gold, breaking through the last gray clouds. Beautiful and deadly, Colter said. That's at least 3 feet of fresh snow, maybe more in the drifts. Can we travel? Evangeline asked. Depends where we're going. She turned to look at him. The Hartwell Ranch is northwest of here, maybe 15 miles if I'm reading the landmarks right. Those peaks. She pointed at distant mountains, now visible in the clearing light. Those are the tobacco roots. My land runs along the eastern edge of that range. 15 miles through 3 feet of snow, Colter said. That's a full day of hard traveling, maybe more. We'd need to leave soon to make it before dark. And you? Evangeline asked. Where were you headed? Southeast toward the Yellowstone Valley, Colter said. Opposite direction. They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken decision hanging between them. Then Evangeline spoke quietly. I won't ask you to come with me, Colter. You've already saved my life. I have no right to ask for more. But Colter was already shaking his head. You think I'm going to let you ride 15 miles through that alone? What if you collapse again? What if your horse throws a shoe, or you hit deep drift? I'm quite capable. I know you are. Colter interrupted. But capable people die out here too, especially alone. Evangeline studied his face. So you'll escort me home and then continue on your way." "That's the plan," Colter said, though something in his chest tightened at the words. "All right then," Evangeline said. "Let's get ready." They worked efficiently in the growing light, sharing the last of the coffee and hardtack, preparing the horses, ensuring they left the cabin as they'd found it, with wood stacked and kindling ready for the next traveler who might need shelter. When they finally mounted up, the sun was fully risen, turning the snow into a blinding field of white. Colter pulled his hat low and squinted against the glare. "Stay close," he said. "If one of us breaks through into deep snow, the other can help." Evangeline nodded, her face set with determination. She looked stronger today, color back in her cheeks, those winter sky eyes alert and focused. They rode. The going was brutally slow. The horses struggled through the deep snow, sometimes sinking to their chests in hidden drifts. They had to backtrack twice when the snow became impassable, searching for better routes. But Evangeline proved to be an excellent navigator, reading the land with practiced ease, choosing paths that minimized the worst of the struggle. They didn't talk much. All their energy went into the journey. But Colter found himself acutely aware of Evangeline's presence, the way she sat her horse, the quiet sounds of encouragement she murmured to the animal, the determined set of her shoulders. Around noon they stopped to rest the horses and share the last of the dried apples. They'd climbed to higher ground, where the wind had scoured some of the snow away, making travel easier. "How much further?" Colter asked. Evangeline pointed. "See that gap in the ridgeline? That's Devil's Pass. Once we're through that, it's another 5 miles to the ranch house." "Devil's Pass," Colter repeated. "That's encouraging." She smiled. "It's not as bad as it sounds. The pass itself is wide and gradual. My father named it that to discourage claim jumpers back in the early days." "Did it work?" "No," Evangeline admitted, "but it made him feel better." As they rode through the afternoon, Evangeline began to talk more, describing the ranch, her father's legacy, the challenges of running such a large operation. Colter listened, asking questions, genuinely interested despite himself. "We run about 7,500 head right now," Evangeline said. "Could support more, but I'm careful about overgrazing. The land comes first. If you destroy the land chasing short-term profit, you destroy everything." "That's smart thinking," Colter said. "I've worked ranches that didn't understand that. Couple bad years and they were done." "Exactly," Evangeline said. "My father built Hartwell to last generations. I intend to honor that." They were approaching Devil's Pass now, and Colter could see she'd been right. It was a gentle gap between two ridges, wide enough for easy passage. As they rode through, the view opened up on the other side. Colter caught his breath. The valley below was stunning. The Madison River cut through it like a silver ribbon flanked by cottonwoods. Rich grazing land stretched in all directions, dotted with cattle even now in winter. And there, nestled against a stand of pines, was the ranch house, a sprawling structure of logs and stone smoke rising from multiple chimneys, surrounded by barns and outbuildings that looked more like a small town than a simple ranch. "That's Hartwell," Evangeline said, and there was pride in her voice. "Love." As they descended toward the ranch, riders appeared in the distance, moving fast in their direction. 6 men on horseback, spread out in a search pattern. "That's Marcus," Evangeline said, relief evident. "My foreman." The riders converged on them quickly. The lead man, Marcus, presumably was in his late 40s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. When he saw Evangeline, his entire body sagged with relief. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice rough. "Thank God. We've had search parties out since dawn." "I'm fine, Marcus," Evangeline said. "Thanks to Mr. Brennan here. He found me in the storm and got us both to shelter." 6 pairs of eyes turned to Colter, assessing. He sat straight under their scrutiny, meeting their gazes steadily. Marcus rode closer, extending his hand. "Then, we owe you a debt, Mr. Brennan. Miss Hartwell is—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Essential to Hartwell Ranch. To all of us." Colter shook the offered hand. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," said one of the other riders, a younger man with earnest eyes. "Most wouldn't have. Most would have kept riding." The truth of that hung in the cold air. Then Marcus turned back to Evangeline. "James made it back yesterday afternoon," he reported. "He's fine, just worried sick about you. The whole ranch has been." "I'm sorry for worrying everyone," Evangeline said. "But I'm home now. Let's get out of this cold." The group turned toward the ranch house, and Colter found himself riding beside Marcus, while Evangeline moved ahead with the younger hands, answering their questions about her ordeal. "You planning on staying?" Marcus asked quietly. Colter glanced at him, surprised. "No, just escorting Miss Hartwell home. Then I'll move on." "Pity," Marcus said. "We could use good men, and any man who risks himself for a stranger." He shook his head. "That's the kind of character that's hard to find." "I appreciate that," Colter said. "But I don't stay anywhere long." Marcus didn't push, but something in his expression said he understood more than Colter had spoken aloud. As they rode into the main yard, people emerged from buildings, ranch hands, a matronly woman who could only be the housekeeper, even a few children who must belong to married hands. They all gathered around Evangeline, their relief palpable. This wasn't just a ranch, Colter realized. It was a community, a family, and Evangeline was the heart of it. The housekeeper. Mrs. Chen Colter learned immediately took charge, ushering Evangeline toward the house with firm instructions about hot baths and warm food. Evangeline paused at the door and looked back at Colter. "Come inside when you're settled," she called. "Please, we need to talk." Then she was gone, swept away by Mrs. Chen's maternal efficiency. Marcus showed Colter to the bunkhouse, where he could wash up and leave his gear. The building was well-maintained, warm, with individual bunks and real mattresses, a far cry from many ranch bunkhouses Colter had seen. "Take your time," Marcus said. "When you're ready, head to the main house. Mrs. Chen will have food waiting, and Miss Hartwell will want to speak with you properly." Colter washed the trail dust from his face and changed into his one clean shirt. He felt strange off balance. This wasn't how these things usually went. Usually he delivered whoever needed help, collected any offered payment, and rode on. Clean. Simple. No complications. But nothing about Evangeline Hartwell felt simple. When he walked to the main house, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The front door opened before he could knock, Mrs. Chen somehow knowing exactly when he'd arrive. "She's in the study," the housekeeper said. "Second door on the left, and Mr. Brennan, thank you for bringing her home." Colter nodded, not trusting his voice. The house's interior was impressive wood paneling, comfortable furniture, shelves of books, paintings on walls. This was wealth, but not the showy kind. This was money that had been earned and kept through careful management. He found the study and knocked. "Come in," Evangeline's voice called. She'd changed into a simple dress of deep blue, her hair pulled back but still damp from her bath. She looked different here, in her own space, more herself, somehow more settled. She stood behind a large desk covered with maps and ledgers, and she smiled when she saw him. "Sit, please," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Mrs. Chen is bringing dinner for both of us. I hope you don't mind eating in here. I thought we could talk more freely." Colter sat uncomfortable in the fine chair. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes," Evangeline said, moving around the desk to sit in the chair beside him rather than behind the desk. "I want to offer you a job." Colter's stomach dropped. He'd been expecting gratitude, maybe payment for his help. Not this. "Miss Hartwell." "Evangeline," she corrected. "Evangeline," he amended. "I appreciate the offer, but like I told Marcus, I don't stay anywhere long." "Why not?" she asked directly. "Because I move with the seasons. Find work, do the job, move on. That's how I operate." "That's what you do," Evangeline said. "I'm asking why." Colter stood up, suddenly needing to move. We talked about this last night. I don't put down roots. I don't make commitments I can't keep. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Yes, Evangeline said firmly. Because can't means you're trapped by circumstance. Won't means you're making a choice, and choices can be changed. Colter turned to face her. Why does this matter to you? You've got Marcus and a whole crew. You don't need me. Evangeline stood as well, moving closer. You're right. Hartwell Ranch functions perfectly well without you. But that's not why I'm asking you to stay. Then why? Because yesterday you made a choice, Evangeline said. You chose to save me instead of saving yourself. You chose connection over isolation. And I think that choice meant something. I think you're tired of running Colter, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet. The words hit too close to truth. Colter looked away, unable to hold her gaze. I don't know if I can be what you need, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to be anything except yourself, Evangeline said. I'm offering you a job as a ranch hand to start. Good wages, room and board, honest work. Stay through the spring, through the summer if it suits you. And if come fall you still want to move on. She shrugged. Then you move on. No hard feelings. And if I can't stay that long? Then you can't, Evangeline said. But at least try Colter. At least give yourself the chance to find out if you can, Mrs. Chen knocked and entered with a tray of food, roast beef potatoes, fresh bread coffee. The aroma made Colter's stomach growl. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a real meal. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was excellent, and Colter found himself relaxing despite his inner turmoil. This place had a way of pulling at him, making him want things he'd long ago decided were impossible. Tell me about the work, he finally said. Evangeline's face lit up. Right now we're in the quietest season. Winter feeding maintenance work preparing for spring calving. Come March it gets intense calving season runs through April. Then we've got branding moving herds to summer pasture fence, repairs, water system maintenance. In fall, there's the gather and sorting for market. It's never boring. And you do all of this? Colter asked. With Marcus and the crew, yes, Evangeline said. I'm not one of those owners who stays in the big house while others do the work. I'm in the calving sheds at 3 in the morning, same as everyone else. I ride fence lines. I help with difficult births. I make decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell. My father taught me that if you want respect, you earn it through work, not through inherited title. Your father sounds like he was quite a man, Colter said. He was, Evangeline said softly. Flawed, stubborn, occasionally infuriating. But he built something that matters. Something that supports 40 families, that provides quality beef to markets from here to Chicago, that proves you can operate with integrity and still succeed. She paused. I'm trying to honor that legacy while also making it my own. Colter could hear the weight she carried in those words. The responsibility of being not just a ranch owner, but the center of a community that depended on her. What made you decide to run it yourself? He asked. After your father died, you could have hired a manager, stepped back, lived off the profits. Evangeline laughed, but there was no humor in it. I could have. People suggested it loudly and often, particularly the men who thought a woman had no business running a ranch. Her eyes hardened. But this is my heritage, Colter. My blood and my father's blood soaked into this land. I wasn't about to hand it over to someone else because society thought I should. How'd they take that? Some respected it. Some still think I'm playing at ranching and will eventually fail. A few have actively tried to undermine me. She shrugged. But I'm still here, still succeeding, and every year the doubters get a little quieter. I can see why, Colter said. You're formidable. I have to be, Evangeline said simply. This territory doesn't respect weakness. They finished eating, and Mrs. Chen returned to clear the dishes. When she left, Evangeline poured them both coffee and returned to her seat. I need to know something, Colter said. If I stay, what are you really hoping for? Evangeline met his eyes. Honestly. Always. I'm hoping you'll find something here worth staying for. Not for me, don't misunderstand. I'm not offering you this job because I expect anything beyond good work. But I watched you yesterday, Colter. I watched you fight your own instincts to save me. I watched you care for the horses, tend the fire, share your supplies without hesitation. You're a good man pretending to be a loner, and I think you're exhausted from pretending. Colter's throat tightened. You don't know me. No, Evangeline agreed. But I'd like to, and I think you'd like to know yourself again, too. The self that existed before loss taught you that isolation was safer than connection. You're asking a lot, Colter said. I'm asking you to try, Evangeline corrected. That's all. Just try. Colter stood and walked to the window. Outside the ranch was settling for the night. Lights glowed in the bunkhouse. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney. In the distance, he could see hands checking on cattle in the holding pens. Community. Purpose. Belonging. Everything he'd been running from for 8 years. Everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. If I stay, he said slowly, I'm just another hand. I pull my weight, follow Marcus's direction, and I don't get special treatment because I helped you. Agreed, Evangeline said immediately. And if I decide to leave, you don't try to guilt me into staying. Agreed. Colter turned to face her. And we don't talk about feelings or connections or any of that. I work, you pay me. We keep it professional. Evangeline stood and extended her hand. Deal. Colter took her hand, meaning to shake it formally. But the moment their skin touched, something passed between them, a current of recognition, of possibility. Evangeline felt it too. He could see it in her eyes. She pulled her hand back gently. Welcome to Hartwell Ranch, Colter Brennan. Don't make me regret this, Colter said, though he was already half smiling. I'll do my best, Evangeline promised. Marcus showed him back to the bunkhouse, where the other hands had gathered for the evening. They made space for him, easily asking questions about where he'd worked before, what skills he had, how he'd ended up in the storm with Miss Hartwell. Colter answered carefully, giving enough information to be friendly without revealing too much. But he found himself relaxing into the camaraderie, the easy banter of men who worked hard together. This could work, he thought, as he settled into his bunk that night. Just for a season, just to see. But deep down in a place he wasn't ready to examine yet, Colter suspected he was lying to himself. The days fell into a rhythm. Colter rose before dawn, with the other hands worked through daylight, handling whatever tasks Marcus assigned, feeding cattle, repairing tack, mucking stalls, fixing fence in areas where they could access it through the snow. The work was hard but satisfying, made easier by the quality of the crew. These weren't just hired hands killing time. They were skilled men who took pride in their work. And everywhere there was Evangeline, not hovering or micromanaging, but present. She rode out with crews to check on distant herds. She worked in the calving shed when early births started. She sat with Marcus every evening going over accounts and planning. She knew every animal, every section of land, every detail of the operation. The hands respected her not because she owned the place, but because she'd earned their respect through competence and fairness. Colter found himself watching her more than he should. The way she handled a difficult horse with patience and skill. The way she laughed at James's terrible jokes. The way she listened when hands brought her problems, really listened before making decisions. 2 weeks after his arrival, Colter was in the barn repairing a broken stall door when Evangeline appeared. Need help? She asked. Thought you had accounts to review with Marcus. Colter said, not looking up from his work. Finished early, Evangeline said. She picked up a hammer. Which board needs securing? They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Evangeline spoke quietly. You're fitting in well. The hands like you. They're good men, Colter said. They are, Evangeline agreed. Marcus said you've got excellent instincts with the cattle. Said you spotted a sick heifer yesterday before anyone else noticed the symptoms. Colter shrugged. Just paying attention. That's exactly what Marcus said, Evangeline replied. He also said you're wasted as a regular hand. Said you've got the mind of a foreman. Colter set down his tools. I'm fine where I am. I know, Evangeline said. I'm not pushing. Just telling you what Marcus observed. She paused. Have you thought about staying past spring? No, Colter lied. Liar, Evangeline said cheerfully. Despite himself, Colter smiled. You're mighty sure of yourself. I'm sure of what I see, Evangeline corrected. And I see a man who's starting to remember what it feels like to have a home. Before Colter could respond, shouting erupted from outside. They both dropped their tools and ran toward the sound. In the main yard, Marcus stood facing three well-dressed men on horseback strangers, clearly not ranch hands. The lead man was perhaps 50 expensive clothes calculating eyes. The men flanking him looked like hired muscle. Telling you we're here on legitimate business, the lead man was saying as Colter and Evangeline arrived. And I'm telling you, Miss Hartwell isn't receiving visitors without appointment, Marcus replied firmly. Actually, I'm right here, Evangeline said, stepping forward. Her voice was pleasant, but her posture alert. I'm Evangeline Hartwell. What's your business? The lead man dismounted and removed his hat. Silas Rutherford, Miss Hartwell. I represent the Continental Land and Cattle Company. We're very interested in your property. My ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Rutherford, Evangeline said immediately. I understand, Rutherford said smoothly. But perhaps you'd consider hearing our offer before deciding. We're prepared to be very generous. The answer is no, Evangeline said flatly. Hartwell Ranch has been in my family for 20 years. It's not for sale at any price. Rutherford's pleasant expression didn't change, but something cold flashed in his eyes. Miss Hartwell, the cattle industry is changing. Small operations can't compete with consolidated companies like Continental. We have capital political connections, access to Eastern markets. Independents like yourself will find it increasingly difficult to survive. Is that a prediction or a threat? Colter heard himself ask. Rutherford turned his gaze to Colter, assessing. And you are Colter Brennan, Evangeline said before Colter could answer. One of my hands. But he asks a valid question, Mr. Rutherford. Are you predicting market changes or threatening to make my life difficult? Simply stating economic reality, Rutherford said. The frontier era of independent ranchers is ending, Miss Hartwell. Companies like Continental are the future. You'd be wise to sell now while the offer is generous, rather than struggle for years before inevitably losing everything anyway. Thank you for your concern, Evangeline said, her voice ice. But I'll take my chances. Marcus, please escort Mr. Rutherford and his associates off Hartwell land. Rutherford's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. That's my prerogative, Evangeline said. Good day, Mr. Rutherford. The three men remounted, but Rutherford paused before leaving. We'll be in touch, Miss Hartwell. Continental doesn't give up easily. Neither do I, Evangeline replied. They watched the riders leave. When they were out of sight, Evangeline's rigid posture finally relaxed slightly. That's not the first time they've approached you, Colter said. It wasn't a question. Third time in 6 months, Evangeline confirmed. They're systematically buying up ranches in the territory, usually smaller operations that are struggling, but they want Hartwell because of our water rights and access to the river valley. And they're not going to stop asking, Marcus added grimly. No, Evangeline agreed. They're not. She looked at Colter. Still think staying was a good idea. Colter met her eyes. Seems like you might need someone who asks inconvenient questions. Evangeline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Seems like I might. As they dispersed back to work, Colter felt something shift inside him. Continental's threat wasn't just about business. It was about power, about big interests trying to crush smaller ones. About people like Rutherford, who saw land and cattle as nothing more than numbers on a ledger, while people like Evangeline saw them as heritage community life. and Colter realized with sudden clarity that he knew which side he was on. Maybe staying wouldn't be just for a season after all. Maybe some things were worth fighting for. 3 weeks passed before Continental made their next move. Colter was riding fence line in the northern section with James when they found the first cut. 20 feet of wire had been deliberately sliced, allowing cattle to wander onto what had recently become Continental property, a struggling ranch they'd bought out 2 weeks prior. "This wasn't weather damage," James said, examining the clean cuts. "Someone did this on purpose." Colter knelt beside the fence, running his fingers over the severed wire. "Recent, too. Maybe last night." "Why would anyone—" James stopped himself. "Continental." "Can't prove it," Colter said. "But yeah, Continental." They repaired the fence and rode back to report to Marcus and Evangeline. By the time they reached the main house, 2 other crews had returned with similar findings. 5 separate fence cuts all along boundaries with recently acquired Continental properties. Evangeline stood in her study staring at a map with red marks indicating each cut. Her face was calm, but Colter could see the tension in her shoulders. "They're testing us," Marcus said, "seeing how we'll respond." "Or setting us up," Colter added. "If our cattle drift onto their land, they can claim we're trespassing, maybe confiscate the animals." Evangeline turned to face them. "Then we don't give them that satisfaction. Marcus, double the boundary patrols. I want every inch of fence line checked daily. Anyone sees Continental riders near our property, I want to know immediately." "That's a lot of manpower," Marcus said. "We're already stretched thin with calving season starting." "I know," Evangeline said quietly, "but we don't have a choice." Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. More fence cuts. A salt lick station destroyed. 2 of their best bulls went missing from a northern pasture. They found them 3 days later on Continental land, conveniently rescued by Continental hands who demanded a fee for their trouble. Evangeline paid the fee through gritted teeth. She knew, as they all did, that Continental had stolen the bulls in the first place. "This is how they work," she explained to Colter one evening as they rode back from checking the eastern boundary. "They don't make one big aggressive move. They make 100 small ones. Each individually isn't worth fighting over, but together they bleed you dry. Death by 1,000 cuts." "So what do we do?" Colter asked. "We don't retaliate," Evangeline said firmly. "That's what they want. They want us to do something stupid, something violent, so they can bring in the territorial marshal and paint us as the aggressors. And we just take it. We document everything," Evangeline said. "Every cut fence, every missing animal, every Continental rider spotted where they shouldn't be. We build a case. And when we have enough evidence, we take it to the territorial authorities." "You really think the law will help?" Colter couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Evangeline glanced at him. "I have to believe it will. Because if I don't believe in the rule of law, then I'm no better than Rutherford." But Colter could see the doubt in her eyes. Calving season hit in earnest, and for a while the Continental problem took a back seat to the immediate crisis of bringing new life into the world. Colter found himself working 18-hour days in the calving shed, helping with difficult births, ensuring newborns nursed properly, treating sick calves. Evangeline was there through it all, working alongside her hands without complaint. Colter watched her pull a breech calf at 3 in the morning, her arms covered in blood to the elbows, her face set with concentration. When the calf finally slipped free and took its first gasping breath, she smiled with such pure joy that something cracked in Colter's chest. "Never gets old," she said, looking up at him. "Every single one feels like a miracle." "Yeah," Colter said softly. "It does." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Then the mother cow demanded attention, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them. Colter could feel it in the way Evangeline sought him out during the day, asking his opinion on ranch decisions. In the way she smiled when she saw him. In the comfortable silence they'd developed working side by side without needing to fill the quiet with words. He was falling for her. Had been falling for her since that first moment in the snow. And the realization terrified him. One night after a particularly brutal day of calving, Colter found himself alone in the barn, checking on a premature calf they were keeping warm near the stove. The calf was weak but fighting, and Colter sat with it, offering a bottle every few hours. "You're good with them." Colter turned to find Evangeline in the doorway. She'd changed out of her work clothes into a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Just doing the job," Colter said. "No," Evangeline said, moving closer. "It's more than that. You care. About the animals, about this place. About—" She stopped herself. "About what?" Colter asked quietly. "About being here," Evangeline finished. "You've stopped looking toward the horizon every morning. Stopped planning your exit." "How do you know what I'm planning?" "Because I've been watching you," Evangeline said simply. "The way you've been watching me." Colter's heart hammered. "Evangeline." "I know we said we'd keep it professional," she interrupted. "I know you don't want complications. But Colter, there's something between us. Has been since that cabin. And I'm tired of pretending there isn't." Colter stood, putting distance between them. "You're my employer. This is a bad idea." "Why?" "Because you might actually let yourself care about someone." Evangeline's voice was soft but direct. "Because you might actually have to risk your heart." "Because people leave." Colter said, the words ripping out of him. "People die. People disappoint you. And then you're alone again, only now it hurts worse, because you let yourself believe it could be different." "Oh, Colter," Evangeline said, and her voice was full of understanding. "I'm not your father. And you're not 17 anymore, losing everything you loved." "How did you—" "Because I've lost people too," Evangeline said. "And I understand the fear. God, I understand it. Every day I wake up terrified something will happen to this ranch, to the people who depend on me. Every day I'm afraid I'm not strong enough, smart enough, tough enough to protect what matters." She moved closer. "But the fear doesn't go away just because you isolate yourself. It just gets lonelier." "So what are you saying?" Colter asked. "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you," Evangeline said. "And I think you might be falling in love with me too. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, we could both get hurt. But Colter—" Her voice broke slightly. "What if we don't? What if this is the thing that actually works?" Colter stared at her, his entire world tilting. "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking you to take a chance," Evangeline said. "To try. That's all I've ever asked from you." Before Colter could respond, shouting erupted outside. They both ran toward the sound. In the main yard, lit by torches, were at least 20 Continental riders. At their head was Rutherford, flanked by 2 men Colter didn't recognize. Behind them, several Continental hands held torches. Marcus and the Hartwell crew had assembled, armed but not threatening. The 2 groups faced each other in tense standoff. "What's the meaning of this?" Evangeline demanded, striding forward with Colter beside her. "Miss Hartwell," Rutherford said pleasantly, "I apologize for the late hour, but we have a situation that requires immediate resolution." "Then speak plainly," Evangeline said. "What do you want?" One of the men beside Rutherford stepped forward. He wore a badge, territorial deputy marshal. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Deputy Marshal Crawford. I have here a sworn complaint from Continental Land and Cattle Company alleging that your hands have been trespassing on Continental property, destroying equipment, and threatening their employees." "That's a lie," Marcus said immediately. "Is it?" Rutherford asked. "Then perhaps you can explain why 3 of my hands witnessed Hartwell riders cutting our fence lines 2 nights ago." "We cut no fences," Evangeline said coldly. "If anything, it's your men who've been cutting our fences and destroying our property." "Do you have proof of these allegations?" Crawford asked. "We've documented every incident." "Documentation isn't proof," Rutherford interrupted smoothly. whereas I have eyewitness testimony from multiple employees. And he nodded to one of his men who held up a branding iron. We found this hidden near one of our damaged fence lines. Note the Hartwell brand. Colter's blood ran cold. The setup was perfect. Continental had been planning this all along, every fence cut, every small harassment, all leading to this moment. That iron could have been taken from anywhere, Evangeline said. Planted as false evidence. That's a serious accusation, Miss Hartwell, Crawford said. Without evidence, I have to act on the complaint before me. He pulled out a document. I'm serving you with a temporary injunction. Until this matter is resolved, you're forbidden from operating on any land within 5 miles of Continental properties. That includes most of your northern and eastern sections. That's nearly half my ranch, Evangeline said, her voice shaking with fury. Half my grazing land. How am I supposed to operate? That's not my concern, Crawford said. I'm simply enforcing the law. You'll have an opportunity to present your case at a hearing in Bozeman in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Evangeline repeated. Spring is our busiest season. 3 weeks of being unable to use half my land. Perhaps, Rutherford said quietly, this would be an appropriate time to reconsider Continental's offer. We're still prepared to pay a fair price for your property, Miss Hartwell, and it would resolve all these unfortunate legal complications. Evangeline's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Colter thought she might actually strike Rutherford, but she held herself back, her voice deadly calm when she spoke. Get off my property, all of you. The injunction stands, Crawford said. I'll be back to ensure compliance. Rutherford smiled a cold, satisfied expression. Good evening, Miss Hartwell. I do hope you'll think carefully about your situation. They rode away, torches disappearing into the darkness. The moment they were gone, Evangeline's composure cracked. She stumbled slightly and Colter caught her arm. I'm fine, she said, but her voice was hollow. Meeting, Marcus said quietly. Study, now. They gathered in Evangeline's study, Evangeline, Colter, Marcus, and James, who served as informal second foreman. Evangeline poured whiskey for everyone with shaking hands. They've outmaneuvered us, she said flatly. Everything we've done to stay legal to build evidence, it doesn't matter. They fabricated evidence, bought a deputy marshal, and now they're strangling us legally. We fight it in court, Marcus said. With what? Evangeline asked. Fighting this injunction will cost thousands in legal fees, and even if we win, Continental will just file another complaint, another injunction. They have endless resources. We don't. So, we just give up? James asked. No, Evangeline said sharply. Then softer. I don't know. Colter had been quiet thinking. Now he spoke. The injunction bans us from operating within 5 miles of Continental properties, but it doesn't ban us from our own land. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked. We move the herds, Colter said. Pull everything back to the central and southern sections. Yes, it's cramped. Yes, it's not ideal. But it keeps our cattle on undisputed Hartwell land, and it buys us time to figure out a real strategy. That's thousands of animals to move, James said. In the middle of calving season. You have a better idea, Colter asked. Silence. We do it, Evangeline said suddenly. She straightened, and Colter could see her pulling herself together, finding strength from somewhere deep inside. We move the herds, starting at dawn. Marcus organized the crew into 3 teams. James, you'll coordinate the northern section move. Colter. She looked at him. You'll handle the eastern section. I'll take the central coordination and ensure we have adequate space set up for the relocated herds. This is going to push our resources to the limit, Marcus warned. I know, Evangeline said. But we don't have a choice. Continental wants us to break to do something desperate. Instead, we're going to be methodical, legal, and absolutely unshakable in our adherence to that injunction. We give them no excuse, no opening for further legal action. And the hearing in 3 weeks? Colter asked. I'll find a lawyer, Evangeline said. the best one I can afford. And we'll present our documentation, our testimony, everything we have. It may not be enough, but—" her voice hardened. "I'm not giving them Hartwell without a fight." They worked through the night planning logistics. By dawn, the entire ranch knew the situation and the plan. Not a single hand suggested quitting. If anything, the attack seemed to have unified them, turned them into something fierce and determined. "Continental picked the wrong woman to mess with," one of the older hands muttered, and others nodded agreement. The herd move took 5 brutal days. Thousands of cattle, including new calves, relocated across miles of difficult terrain. They lost animals, some calves too weak for the journey, a few cows that wandered off in the chaos. But mostly, they succeeded. Colter worked until his body screamed, pushing through exhaustion. He watched Evangeline do the same, refusing to rest while her people worked. She was in the saddle before dawn, and still moving at midnight, her face drawn with fatigue, but her will unbreakable. On the 5th night, after the last herd had been settled, Colter found her sitting alone on the porch of the main house. She looked completely drained. "It's done," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "For now," Evangeline said. "Until Continental's next move. We'll handle that when it comes." She turned to look at him. "Why are you still here, Colter? You could have left when this started, ridden away clean like you've done 100 times before. Why stay?" Colter took a breath. "Because you were right. That night in the barn before all this started, you were right about everything." "About what specifically?" Evangeline asked softly. "About me being tired of running," Colter said. "About falling in love with you." He met her eyes. "I've been alone for 8 years because it felt safer. But it wasn't safe. It was just empty. And then I found you in that snow, and everything changed." Evangeline's breath caught. "Colter, I'm not good at this." Colter interrupted. "I don't know how to be in love, how to be part of something. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to want to run when things get hard." "Things are already hard," Evangeline pointed out. "Exactly," Colter said. "And I'm still here. That has to mean something." Evangeline reached for his hand. "It means everything." They sat in silence, fingers intertwined, drawing strength from each other. After a while, Evangeline spoke again. "I need to tell you something, about the ranch, about my father." Colter waited. "Hartwell wasn't built on honest dealing," Evangeline said quietly. 20 years ago, when my father first came to this valley, there were already people here, homesteaders. 3 families working together to farm a section of land that included what's now our best water source." Colter felt his stomach tighten. "My father wanted that land," Evangeline continued. "He offered to buy. They refused, so he—" She stopped, struggling with the words. "He hired men to drive them out, to burn their homesteads. People died, Colter, including children." The horror of it hit Colter like a physical blow. "Jesus, Evangeline." "He told me on his deathbed," she said. "Said I needed to know the true cost of Hartwell. Said understanding what it took to build something this big would help me protect it." She looked at him. "But I don't want to protect something built on blood. I want to transform it into something different, something honorable." "Does anyone else know?" Colter asked. "Marcus knows. Mrs. Chen suspects. Continental knows Rutherford mentioned it once, said he had documentation. He thinks it gives him leverage, something to destroy my reputation with if I don't sell." Colter processed this. "So Continental can expose you as the daughter of a murderer, destroy your standing in the community, turn people against you." "Yes," Evangeline said simply. "And you're telling me this because if you're going to stay, you deserve to know the truth," Evangeline said. "All of it. The beautiful parts and the ugly parts. And you deserve the chance to walk away." Colter looked at her, at this woman who'd inherited blood-soaked land and was trying to redeem it, who fought corporate greed with integrity, who worked beside her hands and loved her ranch with fierce devotion. "Your father's sins aren't yours," he said finally. "They're my inheritance," Evangeline replied. "No," Colter said firmly. "His land is your inheritance. What you do with it, that's your choice. And from where I'm sitting, you're choosing to build something worth defending." Tears welled in Evangeline's eyes. "You really believe that?" "I really do," Colter said. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stayed that way as night deepened around them. Two people carrying heavy histories, finding strength in each other. The next morning, a rider arrived with a message. Continental was formally requesting Evangeline's presence at their territorial headquarters in Helena for settlement discussions. The meeting was in 1 week. "It's a trap," Marcus said immediately. "They'll try to intimidate you, force you into accepting terms." "I know," Evangeline said, "but I have to go. If I refuse, it looks like I'm avoiding legitimate business discussion." "Then I'm going with you," Colter said. Evangeline started to protest, then nodded. "All right. We'll take the stage from Bozeman. It'll be faster than riding." The week passed in tense preparation. Evangeline drilled with the lawyer she'd hired a sharp woman named Catherine Morrison from Bozeman, who specialized in property law. They prepared documents, organized evidence-crafted arguments. "Your case is solid," Catherine told Evangeline. "But I won't lie to you. Continental has resources and connections we can't match. This is going to be a hard fight." "I'm ready," Evangeline said. The journey to Helena took 2 days by stage. Colter watched Evangeline stare out the window, her face unreadable. She'd worn her finest clothes, a severe black dress that made her look older, more formidable. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked every inch the successful ranch owner. But Colter could see the fear she was hiding. Continental's headquarters was an imposing 3-story building in the heart of Helena. They were ushered into a lavish office where Rutherford waited with 3 other men in expensive suits. "Miss Hartwell," Rutherford said, standing. "Thank you for coming. And you brought your foreman, was it?" "Partner," Evangeline said coolly. "Colter Brennan is my business partner." It was the first Colter had heard of this, but he kept his face neutral. Rutherford gestured to seats. "Please, let's discuss your situation reasonably." What followed was 90 minutes of the most sophisticated intimidation Colter had ever witnessed. Rutherford didn't threaten directly. Instead, he laid out economic realities, falling cattle prices, increasing railroad rates, the unfortunate fact that Continental controlled most access to eastern markets from the region. "We're not trying to destroy you," Rutherford said. "We're offering you a way out before market forces do it anyway. $100,000, Miss Hartwell, cash, for your entire operation. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life." "And what happens to my crew?" Evangeline asked. "The 40 families who depend on Hartwell for their livelihood." "Continental would retain selected employees," Rutherford said. "Those with needed skills. And the rest?" Rutherford shrugged. "Not our concern." "Then we have nothing further to discuss," Evangeline said, standing. "My answer is no. It will remain no. And if Continental continues its harassment and fabrication of evidence, I will bring federal charges. Are we clear?" Something cold flashed in Rutherford's eyes. "I had hoped we could be civilized about this, Miss Hartwell. But if you insist on fighting—" He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Then you should know what you're fighting against." He spread photographs across the desk. Images of burned homesteads, documents with names the families her father had destroyed, testimony from survivors describing the attack. 20 years ago, Rutherford said softly, your father committed murder for profit, built his empire on blood. What do you think happens when this becomes public knowledge? When everyone knows that Hartwell Ranch is founded on the graves of innocent families? Evangeline had gone pale, but her voice stayed steady. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you perspective, Rutherford replied. Sell to us quietly and this information stays private. Your father's reputation remains intact. Your ranch hands never know their beloved Miss Hartwell is the daughter of a killer. Fight us, and we destroy not just your ranch but your name, your legacy, everything your father built." Colter could see Evangeline trembling, could see her struggling, and he knew with perfect clarity that she was about to break. So he did something he'd never done before. He chose to fight instead of run. "You're right," Colter said, drawing everyone's attention. "Thomas Hartwell did terrible things, unforgivable things. But that was 20 years ago. What matters is what's happening now." "Mr. Brennan," Rutherford began. "What's happening now," Colter continued, his voice hard, "is that a legitimate business is being harassed by a corporation using illegal tactics. Fence cutting, theft, fabricated evidence, bribery of law enforcement, and now blackmail." He leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. We're walking out of here. We're fighting your injunction. And if you release that information about Thomas Hartwell," he smiled coldly, "we'll release information about every illegal thing Continental has done in the past 6 months. And unlike your 20-year-old story, our evidence is current, recent, prosecutable." "You're bluffing," Rutherford said. "Try me," Colter replied. They stared at each other. Then Rutherford smiled. "You're making a very foolish choice, Mr. Brennan, both of you." "Maybe," Evangeline said, finding her voice again. "But it's our choice to make." They left the building, neither speaking until they were back on the street. Then Evangeline stopped, turning to face Colter. "You called yourself my business partner," she said. "Seemed appropriate in the moment," Colter replied. "And that speech about fighting meant every word Colter said." Evangeline's eyes searched his face. Then she kissed him right there on the street in the middle of Helena, with people walking past and staring. When she pulled back, she was smiling, despite the tears on her cheeks. "I love you, Colter Brennan," she said. "I love you too," Colter replied. "And we're going to win this. I don't know how yet, but we are." "Together," Evangeline said. "Together," Colter agreed. They had 3 weeks until the hearing. 3 weeks to build an unshakable case. 3 weeks to find evidence that would destroy Continental's credibility. 3 weeks to save everything that mattered. And for the first time in 8 years, Colter wasn't afraid of the fight ahead. He was ready. The stage ride back to Bozeman felt different than the journey out. Colter watched Evangeline stare out the window, but this time, he could see the determination in her profile rather than fear. Something had shifted in that Helena office. Continental had shown their hand too early, revealed their tactics too plainly. "We need proof," Evangeline said suddenly. "Real, undeniable proof of what Continental's been doing." "We have documentation," Colter reminded her. "Documentation they'll dismiss as biased," Evangeline said. "No, we need something harder. Testimony from someone on their side. Evidence they can't explain away." "You're talking about finding someone willing to betray Continental," Colter said. "That's dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous," Evangeline replied. She turned to look at him. "Back in that office when you stood up to Rutherford, you could have stayed quiet. Let me handle it. But you didn't." "I told you I was done running," Colter said. "It was more than that," Evangeline said softly. "You claimed me, publicly, called yourself my partner. Do you know what that means?" Colter met her eyes. "It means I'm all in. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Evangeline reached for his hand. "I've been running Hartwell alone for 4 years, making every decision, carrying every burden by myself because I thought that's what strength looked like, but I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to let someone stand beside you." "I'm not going anywhere," Colter said. "Promise me," Evangeline said. "Promise me that even when this gets worse, and it will get worse, you won't disappear. You won't decide it's safer to leave." Colter thought about all the times he'd run, all the places he'd left behind, the people he'd walked away from, rather than risk caring too much. He thought about the man he'd been in that blizzard, ready to ride past a dying woman to protect himself. "I promise," he said. "I'm staying, Evangeline, for good." She kissed him, then soft and full of promise. And Colter felt the last walls around his heart finally crumble. When they reached Hartwell Ranch, Marcus was waiting with news. "We've had visitors, Continental hands surveying our southern boundary. They weren't trespassing, but they were definitely taking measurements, making notes." "They're looking for weaknesses," Evangeline said, "planning their next move." She dismounted, her expression grim. "Gather everyone. Main barn in 1 hour. I need to address the whole crew." An hour later, 40 ranch hands crowded into the barn. They were tired. The herd relocation had pushed everyone to their limits, but they came without complaint. Evangeline stood on a hay bale so everyone could see her. "I'm not going to lie to you," she began. "Continental is trying to destroy us. They've got resources we don't have, connections we can't match. The injunction hearing is in 3 weeks, and there's a real chance we'll lose." She paused. "If anyone wants to leave to find work somewhere safer, I understand. No hard feelings." Nobody moved. "But if you stay," Evangeline continued, her voice strengthening, "you need to know what you're fighting for. Hartwell Ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's 40 families, it's community. It's the idea that small operations can still compete. That integrity still matters, that we don't have to sell our souls to corporations just to survive." She looked around at the faces watching her. "My father built this ranch through methods I'm not proud of, but we've transformed it into something different, something worth defending. So I'm asking, will you stand with me?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Men shouted their support, stamped their feet, clapped. James whistled loudly. Even the normally stoic Marcus smiled. "Then here's what we're going to do," Evangeline said. "We're going to be perfect, absolutely flawlessly perfect. No mistakes, no violations, no excuses for Continental to use against us. We follow every regulation, respect every boundary document, everything. And we're going to find proof of what they've been doing." After the meeting dispersed, Colter found Marcus checking fence supplies. The older man looked up as Colter approached. "That was quite a speech she gave," Marcus said. "She meant every word," Colter replied. Marcus studied him. "You've changed since you got here. First day you looked like you'd bolt at the first sign of trouble. Now look at you standing up to Continental, calling yourself her partner." "People change," Colter said. "Not usually," Marcus replied. "Most people just become more of what they already were. But you became someone different. Someone better." He paused. "She did that, Evangeline. She sees the best in people and somehow makes them live up to it." "I know," Colter said quietly. "So don't break her heart." Marcus said, his voice hardening. "I've watched that woman fight through grief, doubt, and every kind of challenge this territory can throw at someone, but losing you, that might be the thing that breaks her." "I'm not leaving," Colter said firmly. "Good," Marcus said, "because we're going to need everyone at their best for what's coming." 2 days later, James rode in with news that changed everything. He'd been in town buying supplies when he'd overheard a conversation in the saloon, 2 Continental hands complaining about not being paid their bonuses for special work they'd done. One had mentioned cutting fences. The other had talked about relocating Hartwell cattle onto Continental land. "Did you recognize them?" Evangeline asked. "One of them," James said. "Name's Pike. Young guy, maybe 22. Looked like he was drinking away his pay and his conscience." "Where's he now?" Colter asked. "Still in town last I saw," James replied. "At the boarding house on 3rd Street. Evangeline and Colter exchanged looks. "We need to talk to him," Evangeline said. "That's dangerous," Marcus warned. "If Continental finds out one of their hands is talking to us." "Then we make sure they don't find out," Evangeline said. "Colter and I will go tonight, quietly, just a conversation." They rode into town after dark, leaving their horses at the livery and walking to the boarding house. The proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Dalton, who'd known Evangeline's father, directed them to Pike's room with a knowing look. "Whatever trouble that boy's in," she whispered, "he's been looking like he needs to confess it, been drinking himself stupid every night." They knocked on Pike's door. After a long pause, it cracked open, revealing a haggard young face with bloodshot eyes. "Who are you?" Pike asked. "Someone who can help you," Evangeline said quietly. "May we come in?" Pike stared at them, fear and something like hope warring in his expression. Then he opened the door wider. The room was small and reeked of whiskey. Pike gestured vaguely at 2 chairs and sat on the bed, his hands shaking. "You're Evangeline Hartwell," he said. "I recognize you from—" He stopped himself. "From watching my ranch," Evangeline finished. "Yes, and I know you work for Continental. I also know you've been part of the harassment campaign against my property." Pike's face crumpled. "I didn't want to. I needed the work, and when Rutherford's foreman told us what to do, I thought it was regular ranch competition, you know, but then we started cutting fences, stealing cattle, and I realized—" He looked up at them. "This ain't right. None of it's right." "Will you testify to that?" Evangeline asked. "In court at the injunction hearing." "They'll destroy me," Pike said. "Continental's got reach everywhere. I'll never work again." "Or," Colter said, "you could work for us. Give testimony and we'll offer you a position at Hartwell. Fair wages, honest work." Pike laughed bitterly. "Why would you hire someone who hurt you?" "Because you're trying to make it right," Evangeline said simply. "That takes courage, and I value courage." Pike was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll testify. But I need protection until the hearing. If Continental finds out—" "You'll stay at Hartwell," Evangeline said. "Under guard. No one will know you're there, except our most trusted hands." They smuggled Pike out of town that night, taking back roads to avoid attention. By dawn, he was safely hidden in a line cabin on the far southern section of Hartwell land, with James and 2 other trusted hands guarding him. "This could change everything," Marcus said when they reported back. Real testimony from a Continental employee admitting to the harassment. "If we can keep him safe for 3 weeks," Colter said. "We will," Evangeline said. "We have to." The days that followed were tense. Evangeline met repeatedly with Catherine Morrison, preparing their legal strategy. Colter coordinated security, making sure Pike stayed hidden and safe. The regular ranch work continued, calving, feeding, endless fence maintenance, but everyone knew the real battle was coming. 10 days before the hearing, Continental made their next move. Colter was in the barn when Marcus ran in, his face pale. "Fire. Northern section. Multiple spots burning simultaneously." They rode hard toward the smoke, gathering hands as they went. When they reached the northern boundary, Colter's worst fears were confirmed. 4 separate fires burned along the fence line, clearly set deliberately spaced to cause maximum damage. But someone had made a mistake. The wind was blowing north toward Continental property, not south toward Hartwell's main grazing areas. The fires were threatening Continental's land more than theirs. "Get water," Evangeline ordered. "Shovels, blankets, anything we can use. We fight these fires." "Let Continental handle their own problems," one hand said. "They started this." "No," Evangeline said firmly. "We're better than that. We don't let land burn out of spite, no matter who owns it." They fought the fires for 6 hours, beating flames with wet blankets, digging fire breaks, using precious water to douse the worst spots. Continental hands arrived eventually and worked alongside them, the 2 crews united against the common enemy of fire. When the last flames were finally out, everyone was exhausted, covered in soot and ash. Colter looked up to see Rutherford himself riding toward them, his face thunderous. "Miss Hartwell," Rutherford said coldly, "I have witnesses who will testify your hands set these fires." "Then your witnesses are liars," Evangeline said. "We've been fighting those fires for hours, saving your land as well as ours." One of the Continental hands, an older man with a grizzled face, stepped forward. "She's right, Mr. Rutherford. We saw them fighting the fires when we arrived. If they'd set them, they'd have let them burn." Rutherford's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, nothing. The Continental hand interrupted. "I've worked cattle for 30 years, sir. I know the difference between enemies and neighbors. These folks acted like neighbors today." Other Continental hands nodded agreement. Rutherford saw he was losing control of the narrative and wheeled his horse around. "The hearing will settle this," he said. 3 days, Miss Hartwell. I'll see you in court." When Continental had left, Evangeline turned to the older hand who'd spoken up. "Thank you for the truth." "Just calling it as I see it, ma'am," the man said. He glanced at his fellow Continental workers. "Most of us are just hands trying to make a living. We don't like what Rutherford's doing any more than you do. But we got families to feed." "I understand," Evangeline said. "And the offer stands if any of you want honest work after this is over. Hartwell is hiring." As they rode back to the main ranch, Colter noticed Evangeline was crying silently, not from sadness, from exhaustion and relief, and the weight of everything they were carrying. "We're going to make it," Colter said. 3 more days." 3 more days, Evangeline repeated. "Then we find out if justice actually exists in this territory." The night before the hearing, Evangeline couldn't sleep. Colter found her on the porch long after midnight, staring at the stars. "Scared?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Terrified," Evangeline admitted. "Everything I've worked for, everything my father built, it all comes down to what happens in that courtroom tomorrow." "You've done everything right," Colter said. "Built a strong case, found testimony, operated with complete integrity." "But what if it's not enough?" Evangeline asked. "What if Continental's money and connections win anyway? What if I lose everything?" Colter took her hand. "Then we build again, somewhere else, together." Evangeline looked at him. "You'd really do that? Start over from nothing?" "I've started over from nothing before," Colter said. "But that was alone. This time I'd have you. That makes all the difference." "I don't deserve you," Evangeline said softly. "Yeah, you do," Colter replied. "You deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are, how strong, how you take your father's sins and transform them into something honorable, how you fight for people who depend on you, even when it costs you everything." He cupped her face gently. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Evangeline Hartwell. And tomorrow, you're going to walk into that courtroom and prove it." "Will you marry me?" Evangeline asked suddenly. Colter's breath caught. "What?" "After this is over," Evangeline said. "However it turns out. Will you marry me, Colter Brennan? Will you be my partner in truth, not just in name?" "Yes," Colter said without hesitation. "God, yes." They kissed under the stars, and Colter felt something settle in his chest. This was home. Not the ranch, not the land, but this woman, this connection, this love that had grown from a moment of choice in a blizzard into something unshakable. The hearing took place in the territorial courthouse in Bozeman. The room was packed local ranchers who wanted to see how the fight between Hartwell and Continental would play out, townspeople drawn by gossip, and drama lawyers and officials from both sides. Judge Harrison presided, an older man with a reputation for fairness and impatience with legal nonsense. He listened as Continental's lawyers presented their case, the fabricated evidence, the purchased testimony, all delivered with confident arrogance. Then Catherine Morrison stood to present Hartwell's defense. She was methodical and devastating. She presented documentation of every incident with dates and witnesses. She showed evidence that the Hartwell branding iron Continental had found had actually been reported stolen 2 weeks before their supposed discovery. She demonstrated patterns of harassment consistent with corporate intimidation tactics. And then she called Pike to the stand. The young man was nervous, but determined. He testified about specific orders he'd received from Continental's foreman to cut Hartwell fences, to relocate cattle onto Continental property, to create evidence that could be used against Evangeline. He provided names, dates, details that Continental's lawyers couldn't refute. Continental's lead attorney tried to discredit him, painting him as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. But Pike stood firm. "I'm not proud of what I did," Pike said, "but I'm trying to make it right. Miss Hartwell gave me that chance when she had every reason to turn me away. That's the kind of person she is, and that's why Continental's trying so hard to destroy her, because she won't be corrupted." When Pike finished, Catherine called the Continental hand who'd spoken up after the fire. He testified reluctantly but honestly about the pattern of dirty tactics he'd witnessed. Finally, Evangeline herself took the stand. Continental's lawyer stood clearly ready to deploy their nuclear option. "Miss Hartwell, isn't it true that your ranch was built on land stolen through violence, that your father murdered homesteaders to claim this property?" The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Evangeline paled but held her ground. "Yes," she said clearly. "It's true. My father committed terrible acts to establish Hartwell Ranch. He told me this himself before he died, and I've spent every day since trying to atone for those sins by operating with complete integrity." "So you admit," the lawyer began triumphantly. "I admit my father's crimes," Evangeline interrupted. "But I also submit that Continental's current crimes, harassment, vandalism, bribery, arson, are far more relevant to this hearing than actions taken 20 years ago. You're using my father's sins to distract from your own wrongdoing. But I won't let you. Yes, Hartwell has blood in its foundation. But what I've built on that foundation is honest, legal, and beneficial to this entire community. Can Continental say the same?" Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Miss Hartwell raises an excellent point. Mr. Sutton, unless you have evidence directly relevant to the current injunction case, move on." Continental's lawyer faltered clearly, having expected Evangeline to collapse under the accusation, rather than acknowledge and contextualize it. Catherine seized the momentum, presenting testimony from neighboring ranchers about Continental's aggressive expansion tactics, from townspeople about Continental's intimidation of local officials, from ranch hands across the territory about similar harassment they'd experienced. By the time both sides rested, the narrative had shifted completely. Continental wasn't fighting legitimate business competition, they were engaging in systematic corporate bullying. Judge Harrison took only 30 minutes to deliberate. The evidence presented makes clear that Continental Land and Cattle Company has engaged in a pattern of harassment, vandalism, and fraudulent accusation against Hartwell Ranch, he announced. "The injunction is hereby dissolved. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into Continental's business practices throughout the territory. Deputy Marshal Crawford, you're suspended pending review of your conduct in this matter." He looked at Rutherford. "Mr. Rutherford, I suggest Continental cease all contact with Hartwell Ranch immediately. Am I understood?" "Perfectly, Your Honor," Rutherford said through gritted teeth. "Good," Harrison said. "This court is adjourned." The courtroom exploded in applause. Ranchers who'd been watching from the gallery crowded around Evangeline, congratulating her, thanking her for standing up to Continental. Catherine Morrison smiled with satisfaction. Pike looked relieved. And Colter felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. Complete, uncomplicated joy. They rode back to Hartwell Ranch in triumph, arriving to cheers from the assembled crew. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. Someone broke out fiddles and guitars. The celebration lasted into the night, but eventually the crowd dispersed. The hands drifted back to bunkhouses. Quiet settled over the ranch. Colter found Evangeline in her study, staring at maps of Hartwell land. "You did it," he said. "You won." "We won," Evangeline corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you, Colter. Without your strength when I was ready to break. Without you standing beside me and refusing to let me face this alone." "That's what partners do," Colter said. Evangeline smiled. "About that proposal last night, did you mean your answer?" "Every word," Colter said. "I want to marry you, Evangeline. I want to build a life here on this land. I want to take your father's legacy and my own broken history and create something new together." "Then let's do it," Evangeline said. "Tomorrow. No waiting, no elaborate ceremony, just us and the people who matter." "Tomorrow," Colter agreed. They stood together, looking at maps that now represented security, rather than threatland that was truly theirs, a future they could build together. And Colter thought about the man he'd been in that blizzard, isolated, afraid, convinced that safety lay in solitude. That man was gone. In his place stood someone braver, someone who'd learned that the real risk wasn't in loving, but in refusing to love. That strength came not from independence, but from interdependence. That home wasn't a place you lost, but something you built with people who mattered. He'd saved a stranger in a blizzard, and in doing so, he'd saved himself. Morning came too quickly, but Colter woke with a clarity he'd never felt before. Today, he was marrying Evangeline Hartwell. Today, he was choosing permanence over drift connection, over isolation, love over fear. He found Marcus already awake in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. "Big day," Marcus said without looking up. "Yeah," Colter replied. "You nervous?" "Terrified," Colter admitted. "But not about marrying her. About being worthy of her." Marcus straightened, meeting his eyes. "You saved her life, stood beside her through hell, helped her beat Continental. I'd say you've earned your place." He paused. "But here's what matters, you're still here. You didn't run when things got hard. That's all she ever needed, someone who stays." "I'm staying," Colter said. "Good," Marcus replied. "Because if you break her heart now, I'll break your neck." Colter smiled, despite the threat's sincerity. "Fair enough." The ceremony was held at noon in the main yard, with the entire ranch community gathered. No fancy church, no elaborate decorations, just honest people witnessing an honest commitment. Evangeline wore a simple cream dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked nervous and radiant and absolutely beautiful. When she took her place beside Colter, her hand found his immediately. The circuit preacher from Bozeman had ridden out specially, a kindly man who'd known Evangeline's father. He kept the ceremony brief and meaningful. "Marriage on the frontier isn't about romance alone," he said. "It's about partnership, about two people choosing to face whatever comes together rather than separately, about building something that lasts." He looked at Colter and Evangeline. "You've already proven you can weather storms together. Today, you're promising to keep choosing each other every day for the rest of your lives." When it came time for vows, Evangeline spoke first. "Colter Brennan, you found me dying in the snow, and you chose to save me. But more than that, you chose to stay. You chose to fight beside me when you could have walked away. You chose love over fear, connection over solitude." Her voice broke slightly. "I promise to honor that choice every day, to be your partner in truth, to build a life with you that's worth all the risks we've taken." Colter's throat tightened. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Evangeline, 8 years ago, I lost everything, and I swore I'd never risk loss again. I built walls around my heart and called it wisdom. Then I found you in that blizzard, and every wall I'd built started crumbling." He squeezed her hands. "You showed me that real strength isn't in avoiding pain, it's in choosing love, despite knowing it can hurt. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to stop running. I promised to spend every day proving I was worth your faith in me." They exchanged simple gold bands. Evangeline's mother's wedding ring for her, a new one Marcus had commissioned, from the Bozeman silversmith for Colter. When the preacher pronounced them married, the cheer from the assembled crowd was deafening. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast that seemed impossible. Roasted beef, fresh bread pies made from preserved fruit, even a small cake she'd somehow managed. Tables were set up in the yard, and people ate and laughed and celebrated. Colter found himself surrounded by well-wishers. James clapped him on the shoulder. Pike, now officially a Hartwell hand, thanked him awkwardly for giving him a second chance. Even some of the older hands who'd been skeptical of him at first offered genuine congratulations. But it was the conversation with Mrs. Chen that struck deepest. "Mr. Colter," she said, pulling him aside, "I need to tell you something about Miss Evangeline." "All right," Colter said. "When her father died, she was 20 years old and suddenly responsible for everything. This entire ranch, all these people, all this land. She was terrified, but she never showed it. She worked harder than anyone, made smart decisions, earned respect." Mrs. Chen's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But she was so alone. She had people who worked for her, respected her, even loved her. But no one who truly stood beside her as an equal. No one she could be vulnerable with. She gripped Colter's arm. "Until you. You gave her something she'd never had, a true partner. Someone who sees her strength, but also her fear. Someone who lets her be both the leader and the woman." She smiled. "Thank you for that." Colter felt the weight of responsibility and privilege settle over him. "I'll take care of her," he promised. "I know you will," Mrs. Chen said. "And she'll take care of you. That's how this works." As evening fell, the celebration continued with music and dancing. Colter watched Evangeline move through the crowd, laughing with ranch hands, thanking people for coming, looking more relaxed than he'd seen her since that first night in the cabin. When she caught his eye across the yard, she smiled, a private, intimate expression meant only for him. Then she made her way through the crowd to his side. "Dance with me," she asked. "I'm not much of a dancer," Colter warned. "Neither am I," Evangeline said. "We'll figure it out together." They moved to the cleared space where others were dancing, and Colter took Evangeline in his arms. They swayed more than danced, finding their own rhythm that had nothing to do with the music. "Happy?" Colter asked. "So happy it scares me," Evangeline admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going wrong," Colter said firmly. "We fought for this. We earned it." "I know," Evangeline said. "But I spent so long bracing for loss that I don't quite know how to accept joy." "Then we'll learn that too," Colter said. Together. They danced until the stars came out, until the music slowed, until people started drifting away to bunkhouses and homes. Finally, they were alone in the main yard, with just the lingering warmth of celebration around them. "I have something to show you," Evangeline said. She took his hand and led him toward the house, but instead of going inside, she guided him around to the back where a small garden had been planted. In the moonlight, Colter could see it had been recently expanded, new soil turned, markers placed for future plantings. "My mother planted this garden," Evangeline explained. "After she died, my father couldn't bear to maintain it, but I've kept it going all these years. Adding to it, changing it, making it my own while still honoring what she started." She looked at Colter. "I thought maybe you'd want to add to it too. Plant something that's yours. Ours." The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. This was about more than gardening. It was about transformation, taking something with painful history and making it beautiful. About honoring the past while building the future. "I'd like that," Colter said quietly. They stood together in the moonlit garden, and Colter thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The blizzard, the rescue, the slow building of trust and love, the fight against Continental, the choice again and again to stay rather than run. "I need to tell you something," Colter said, "about why I was really in that blizzard." Evangeline waited. "I told you I was drifting, but it was more than that. I was running from Billings. There'd been a shooting, not me, but I'd been involved, tried to break it up. Man died anyway. And the woman I'd been seeing, she asked me to stay to testify about what I'd seen. To put down roots." He paused. "I told her no. I left in the middle of the night because I was too afraid to be needed. Too afraid someone would depend on me, and I'd fail them like I'd failed my father." But you didn't fail your father, Evangeline said gently. I know that now, Colter said. But then I carried that guilt like it was mine to carry. Like if I'd just been smarter, faster, better, I could have saved him. Could have saved the homestead. Could have kept everything from falling apart. You were 17, Evangeline said. I was, Colter agreed. But I didn't let myself be 17. I made myself responsible for things I couldn't control. And when I failed at the impossible, I decided the solution was to never care about anything enough to fail again. He looked at her. Then I found you in the snow. And I had a choice: keep running or stop, save you or save myself. And something in me chose you, chose connection, and everything changed. We saved each other, Evangeline said. You saved my life that day, but I think maybe I saved yours too. Saved you from spending the rest of your life running from the very thing you needed most. You did, Colter said, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for it. They kissed in the moonlight, surrounded by the promise of future growth, and Colter felt complete peace. This was home. This was where he belonged. The next morning brought routine back cattle to feed fences to check work that never stopped on a ranch. But everything felt different now. Colter worked alongside hands who'd become friends on land that was now his home building, something that would last. A week after the wedding, Marcus pulled Colter aside. Got a proposition for you, Marcus said. I'm getting older. This foreman job is getting harder to manage alone, especially with the ranch growing. We need a second foreman officially. He paused. Evangeline and I talked. We want it to be you. Colter felt the weight of the offer. That's a big responsibility. It is, Marcus agreed. But you've earned it. The hands respect you. You make good decisions under pressure. And most importantly, you understand that this ranch is more than business. It's community. That's what Evangeline's father never fully grasped, and what she's trying to build. You get that? I do, Colter said. So, Marcus asked. Yes, Colter said. I'll do it. Good, Marcus said. Now come on. We've got a problem in the north pasture that needs handling. As they rode out together, Colter realized how far he'd come. 6 months ago, he'd been a drifter with no ties and no future. Now he was married, a foreman, part of something larger than himself. And instead of feeling trapped, he felt freed. Spring turned to summer, and Hartwell Ranch thrived. The calves from that difficult season grew strong. The relocated herds settled into their pastures. Pike proved himself a reliable hand, grateful for his second chance. Continental, facing territorial investigation and public scrutiny, pulled back their expansion efforts and left Hartwell alone. Colter learned the rhythms of the ranch through full seasons, the intense work of spring, the steady maintenance of summer, the gathering and sorting of fall. He learned the names of every hand, every section of land, every quirk of the operation. He and Marcus developed an easy partnership, dividing responsibilities based on their different strengths. But more than anything, he learned what it meant to be married to Evangeline Hartwell. She was demanding of herself more than anyone, but she expected excellence from those around her too. She was stubborn, occasionally infuriating, driven to the point of exhaustion. But she was also generous, fiercely loyal, and capable of surprising tenderness in private moments. They fought sometimes about ranch decisions, about when to push and when to rest, about the weight she insisted on carrying alone. But they learned to fight fair, to listen, to compromise, to be partners in truth. 6 months after their wedding, on a cold November evening, Evangeline found Colter in the barn and pulled him aside. I'm pregnant, she said simply. Colter's world tilted. You're what? Pregnant, Evangeline repeated. She looked nervous. Are you happy? Upset, say something. Colter pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. Evangeline laughed against his chest. Good. That's exactly how I feel. When? Colter asked. Late spring. Evangeline said. "Around the time you found me in that blizzard. Fitting somehow." "We're having a baby," Colter said, testing the words. Then louder with joy breaking through, "We're having a baby." The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. Mrs. Chen immediately began planning and fussing. Marcus grinned and offered congratulations. The hands celebrated like it was a victory for the entire community, which in a way it was. Winter came, and with it the familiar challenges: bitter cold snow, the constant work of keeping animals alive through harsh conditions. But this winter felt different to Colter. Not because the work was easier, but because he had people beside him, a wife he loved, a community that depended on him as much as he depended on them, a child coming in the spring. On the anniversary of the day he'd found Evangeline in the snow, they rode out together to the cabin where they'd sheltered. It was still there, still stocked with supplies for the next traveler who might need it. They went inside, and the memories flooded back, the fear, the uncertainty, the beginning of everything that mattered. "I was so scared that night," Evangeline admitted. "Not just of dying, of living, of running this ranch alone forever, of never finding someone who understood." "And now?" Colter asked. "Now I'm scared of different things," Evangeline said, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "Of being a mother, of raising a child in this harsh place, of something happening to you or the baby or the ranch." "Fear doesn't go away," Colter said, "but it gets easier to carry when you're not alone." "When did you get so wise?" Evangeline teased. "When I stopped running long enough to learn something," Colter replied. They stayed in the cabin for a while, sitting by the stove like they had that first night. But everything was different now. Then they'd been strangers. Now they were partners, lovers, friends. Then they'd been fighting for survival. Now they were building a future. "Thank you," Evangeline said suddenly. "For what?" "For stopping," Evangeline said. "For saving me. For staying. For choosing this us when you could have kept running." "Thank you for giving me something worth stopping for," Colter replied. "Worth fighting for. Worth building a life around." As they rode back to the ranch, snow began to fall gentle this time, not the killing blizzard of a year ago, but still a reminder of where they'd started, of the choice that had changed everything. Spring came with new life everywhere. Calves born healthy and strong, colts learning to stand on wobbly legs. And on a warm May evening with Mrs. Chen and a doctor from Bozeman attending, Evangeline gave birth to a daughter. They named her Clara Rose. Clara for Evangeline's mother, Rose, for the resilience they'd learned together. Colter held his daughter for the first time with shaking hands, overwhelmed by how small and perfect she was. This tiny person who depended completely on them. This living symbol of everything they'd built together. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's ours," Evangeline said, exhausted but radiant. "Ours, Colter. Can you believe it?" Colter thought about the man he'd been, the drifter who'd believed safety lay in solitude, who'd run from connection, who'd convinced himself that love was weakness. That man seemed like a stranger now. "I can believe it," he said, "because I learned something out here in this territory. I learned that the strongest thing you can do is let yourself be vulnerable. The bravest thing is to stay when everything in you wants to run. The smartest thing is to build something with people you love, even knowing you might lose it, because having it even temporarily is worth more than a lifetime of safety." Evangeline smiled through tears. "Look at you giving speeches now." "I learned from the best," Colter said. As spring gave way to summer, life settled into new rhythms. Clara grew, thrived, filled the ranch house with noise and joy. Colter balanced ranch work with fatherhood, learning to comfort a crying infant with the same patience he used gentling a skittish colt. The ranch prospered. Word of their victory over Continental had spread, and other small operators looked to Hartwell as proof that integrity could compete with corporate power. Evangeline became an informal leader among independent ranchers, advising them, supporting them, building a network of mutual aid. One evening, as Colter rocked Clara to sleep while Evangeline reviewed accounts, Marcus stopped by the house. Got news, he said. Continental's pulling out of Montana Territory entirely. Regulatory pressure was too much. They're selling off all their acquired properties. Who's buying? Evangeline asked. Mostly the original owners or their families, Marcus said. People getting their land back. Some are asking Hartwell to help them rebuild, teach them what you've built here. Evangeline and Colter exchanged looks. We can do that, Evangeline said. Help them establish sustainable operations, share what we've learned. It'll mean more work, Marcus warned. Good work, though, Colter said. The kind that matters. After Marcus left, Evangeline moved to sit beside Colter, watching their daughter sleep. We did it, she said softly. Not just survived, thrived, built something that's helping others build too. Your father would be proud, Colter said, of how you transformed his legacy. Our legacy now, Evangeline corrected. Yours and mine and Clara's. Something better than what we inherited. Something we chose to build together. Colter kissed her forehead. Something worth staying for. Years passed. Clara grew into a bright, curious child who loved horses and hard work equally. 2 more children followed, a son they named Thomas, after Evangeline's father, but called Tommy, and another daughter named Sarah. The ranch expanded carefully, sustainably, becoming known throughout the territory for quality cattle and ethical practices. Colter never regretted staying. Never looked toward the horizon, wondering what he was missing, because he'd learned the truth that had eluded him for so long. Home wasn't something you lost, or something you found. It was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with people who mattered. He'd been running for 8 years, convinced that motion was safety and stillness was risk. But he'd been wrong. The real risk was in never stopping long enough to build something that lasted. The real safety was in connection, community, love. On the 10th anniversary of the day he'd found Evangeline in the snow, they held a celebration at the ranch. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who'd been part of their journey. Marcus, now officially retired, but still offering advice. Mrs. Chen still ruling the kitchen with benevolent tyranny. Pike, who'd become one of their best hands. James, now foreman in Marcus's place. All the families who made Hartwell not just a ranch, but a community. As Colter looked around at the people gathered, at the children playing at the land, stretching in all directions, at Evangeline standing beside him with their youngest on her hip, he felt something close to wonder. He'd saved a stranger in a blizzard, not knowing she owned the biggest ranch in Montana. But more than that, not knowing she would save him right back. Not knowing that one choice made in the space between heartbeats would lead to this, to everything that mattered. What are you thinking? Evangeline asked, following his gaze across the assembled community. That I'm grateful, Colter said simply. For the blizzard, for stopping, for you, for every single choice that brought us here. Even the hard parts, Evangeline asked. Especially the hard parts, Colter said. Because they taught us what we were strong enough to handle, what we could build together when we stopped trying to do it alone. Clara ran up, tugging on Colter's hand. Papa Tommy says I can't be a foreman when I grow up because I'm a girl. Tell him that's not true. Colter crouched down to her level. Your mama runs this entire ranch, Clara. You can be anything you want to be. That's what I said, Clara replied, satisfied. Then she ran back to correct her brother with the absolute certainty of a child who'd grown up watching her mother command respect from everyone she met. Evangeline laughed. She's going to be formidable. She gets that from you, Colter said. She gets it from both of us, Evangeline corrected. From you choosing to stay and fight. From me choosing to let someone stand beside me. From us choosing each other again and again, no matter what came. As the sun set over Hartwell Ranch, painting the land in shades of gold and crimson, Colter pulled Evangeline close. Around them, their community celebrated. Their children played. Their land prospered. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, everything they'd chosen, it was real, solid, lasting. The man who'd ridden through that blizzard 10 years ago would barely recognize who Colter had become. That man had been running from ghosts, hiding from fear, convinced that solitude was strength. But he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. Real strength was in staying. Real courage was in loving. Real safety was in building something with people you trusted, even knowing the world could take it away at any moment. Because the risk of loss was worth the reality of love. The fear of heartbreak was worth the joy of connection. And a life spent running was no life at all compared to a life spent building, fighting, loving, and choosing every single day to stay. Colter had saved a stranger in a blizzard and found everything he'd been missing. He'd stopped running and discovered what it meant to truly live. He'd chosen love over fear, and that choice had made all the difference.